$1 trillion. That's not a number. That's religious experience. That's what happens if you were to fall asleep at your maths exam and wake up owing God himself. And right now, at this exact moment, it's moving quietly, methodically, through institutions you've probably never even heard of, toward outcomes you were definitely never supposed to talk about. And nobody sent you a memo. Funny that, when $100 trillion is moving in the economy and you're not meant to even notice, nor does your government have the courtesy to even tell you what's going on. So, how did we get here? And why should you be quietly panicking inside right now? Well, let's start with some context, because context, as it turns out, is the thing that people in power prefer you not to have. The global financial system, the entire malaise, the entire thing, every pension fund, every sovereign wealth fund, bond markets, derivative desks, offshore shell companies named after a cheerful and halcyonic Mediterranean island, currently manages somewhere between $100 and $130 trillion in assets. That's not a number. That's a concept. That's the IMF's number, not mine. I didn't make that up in a panic at 2 a.m., although I did read about it at 2 a.m. in quite a panic. Now, here's the thing about money at that scale. It doesn't just sit by. It doesn't lounge around in a vault eating chips or crisps. It flows constantly from asset class to asset class, from country to country, from one set of people who have too much of it to another set of people who also have too much of it. And when it flows, I mean when it really flows in a coordinated direction, it reshapes the world. It builds infrastructure, it topples governments, it topples currencies, it quietly buys every container port in a 12-country region and then acts surprised when somebody notices. Now, this has always been true. The Medici, they were doing this in the 1430s. The East India Company, they were doing it in the 1600s with better branding and even worse ethics. The difference today, the thing that should make you sit up straight and put down that delicious biscuit, is the scale of it all, the speed of it all, and most worryingly, the opacity of it all. Now, we are living through the largest coordinated reallocation of your money, global capital, in recorded history. And it's happening in 3 simultaneous movements that almost nobody is talking about at the same time. But first, let me explain what 100 trillion actually looks like, because human brains are not processed enough or built to process numbers of that scale. If you spent $1 million a day, not a week, not a month, every single day, it would take you 274 years to spend $1 trillion. To spend $1 trillion, you'd need to start in 1751 or around there. That's before even America existed. That's the scale of the numbers we are talking about here. That's before the steam engine. That's back when the dominant global financial system was own land, collect rent, ignore the serfs, essentially. Does this sound familiar? Maybe it should, maybe it shouldn't, but it definitely is unsettling. Now, here's what we do know for certain, gospel truth, from institutions like the Bank of International Settlements, also known as the central bank for central banks, also from the Federal Reserve, and roughly every financial think tank that isn't actively on the payroll of someone who wants you confused. The post-pandemic era triggered something economists call a portfolio rebalancing event, which is a very calm phrase for everyone with enormous amounts of money started moving money at the very same time. They all started rotating. Where did they go? Into hard assets, real estate, infrastructure, commodities, private equity, and increasingly into each other's domestic markets, bypassing Western-dominated financial infrastructure entirely. And here is where it gets very interesting, because while your average financial journalist was writing the 47th piece about whether the Fed might raise rates by 25 basis points, the actual story, the real story, was happening somewhere else entirely. So let me introduce you to the concept called de-dollarisation. All about the dollar, the multipolar dream, and the slow motion heist that nobody is actually calling what it is, which is a daylight robbery. So it sounds like something that happens to you if you drink too much Diet Coke. De-dollarisation. But it's not. De-dollarisation is a deliberate, systematic attempt by a growing coalition of nations, primarily led by China, Russia, the Gulf states, and an increasing number of the global south, to reduce their love of the US dollar. Now, before the Americans in the audience write angry comments, this is not my conspiracy theory. This is stated policy. These governments are telling you what they're doing. They're telling you how they're doing it. You don't have to read between the lines. In fact, you barely have to even read. So here are the numbers. In 2001, the US dollar accounted for 73% of global foreign exchange reserves. But today, according to the IMF and Federal Reserve data of its own, that figure is approximately 58%. The lowest share since the euro was introduced. And over the same period, the share of reserves held in non-traditional currency, e.g. the Chinese yuan, the Australian dollar, the Canadian dollar, the South Korean won, et al., that's almost tripled. Tripled in 20 years without anyone declaring a war, without a single dramatic press conference, just quietly, on spreadsheets, in rooms without windows, while you're watching Netflix, or yours truly. But here's the thing, and this is where the yet comes in, and yet, the dollar is still absolutely dominant. It's still used in approximately 88% of all international trade. In the treasury market, it's still the deepest one. SWIFT is still the preeminent system of the world, okay? So, of course, everything's fine. Click off my video, don't share, like, or subscribe. Except, a parallel system is being built in real time. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now about 6 more countries, which, if you added their names to the acronym, would make it sound like a social movement or something. But they're actively developing alternative payment systems, alternative reserve currencies, alternative trade settlements. This is not a future scenario. This is just another Tuesday. UAE, China, Hong Kong, Thailand, they're all in phased trials of an alternative to the SWIFT system. And this is where the $100 trillion number becomes more than a fun statistic to mention at parties to make everyone uncomfortable, because as the global capital relocates, as institutional money hedges that dollar exposure, and as sovereign wealth funds diversify into non-Western assets, the question isn't whether the system changes. The question is just how fast and how you're going to get hurt and who gets hurt. Spoiler, historically, it's not the people with the sovereign wealth funds who get hurt. Let's talk about China, because quite frankly, we cannot not talk about China. With the Belt and Road Initiative, launched in 2013, I think, currently comprising infrastructure investment across about 150 countries, it's a massive game changer for Chinese trade routes, for performing audacious geopolitical land grabs since the British went to India. The answer is probably, emphatically, simultaneously, all at once, very negative for the legacy systems. Now, here's what we know for sure. These Chinese state-linked entities have invested an estimated $1 trillion in Belt and Road infrastructure since 2013. Ports, railways, power grids, digital infrastructure, the kind of things that don't make the headlines until a country obviously can't repay. Like, Sri Lanka's ports. Look it up. I mean, I'll wait if you don't really know about it. Now, the counter argument, and this is greatly important because here we don't do conspiracies, we do evidence, boys and girls, and is that much of this infrastructure fills a genuine gap. The Asian development banks are estimating that Asia needs about $26 trillion in infrastructure investment through 2030. It's real money, it's real need. That money is definitely not coming from Western institutions. It simply isn't. But here's the uncomfortable dual reality. Good infrastructure and strategic leverage are not mutually exclusive. Both things can be true. Roads that work and debt traps that bite. Development that helps, dependency that follows. All of these things. Who knew it was going to happen? And then we have the American response, of course, which brings us to Act 3 of this disastrous tragedy. It's what the West did, what you can do, and why the answer is depressing, but not hopeless. Now, the United States obviously aren't going to sit by idly and watch. They're not going to greet the de-dollarisation project with a welcome, open arm alacrity. It's going to come back with the Inflation Reduction Act. That's its counter movement. A $369 billion clean energy and industrial investment, which you might have heard of. It was called the CHIPS Act, by Biden, by the way. $280 billion to bring semiconductor manufacturing back to American soil. Now, a cynical person might look at the timeline and notice that none of these initiatives actually existed until China had been doing its thing for about a decade. A cynical person might further observe that the phrase rule-based international order appears to have a very flexible definition depending on whether you are a country currently benefiting from the rules. But a fair person would also note that the Inflation Reduction Act is actually doing something good. When the Federal Reserve raised rates from near zero to over 5% between 2022 and 2023, the fastest tightening cycle in history, by the way, well, in 40 years, something happened that most people didn't register. Capital flew all the way back to the US, not because America suddenly became more productive or more appealing, but because a risk-free 5% return on US treasuries is simply too attractive to ignore. And this is the hidden superpower of dollar hegemony. In a crisis, capital does not run away from America, it runs to it. Yet, we act like the global financial system is neutral, like it doesn't have a home team. So here is the honest summary of where we are. We are watching in slow motion over a period of years and decades rather than hours, a genuine contest over the architecture, the life, the culture, the milieu, the tapestry of global finance, of big money, of who gets to issue the world's reserve currency, who controls the rails, the payment rails, who builds the infrastructure, who sets the terms of international trade. And the current answer is primarily America, but less so than before, and with increasingly loud set of challengers who are building alternative systems with varying degrees of threat and competency. So here is where most YouTube videos start to talk about, buy gold, move to a bunker, pivot to everything is fine, invest in some index funds, track it, but I am going to do none of those things. Because both of those are intellectually lazy and you deserve much better. Here is what the evidence actually suggests you should pay attention to. Number one, the shift away from the dollar dominance is real but slow. The dollar share of reserves has fallen 15 percentage points in 20 years. If that pace continues, it will be dominant still in 2040. You have time. You are not waking up tomorrow with a new global currency. The infrastructure competition matters way more than the currency competition. And this is part 2. Control of physical infrastructure, ports, cables, power grids, satellite networks is how the 21st century version of geopolitical leverage gets truly exercised. These are the real things you need to be watching. Now, I'm aware of the irony of saying that a YouTube channel with a dramatic thumbnail should not be feared. Look, here's what I actually believe, stated plainly, which is, I realize, a departure from the preceding 11 minutes. The global financial system is not neutral. It never has been. It was built piece by piece, mostly after 1944, at Bretton Woods to serve the interests of the post-war Western winners, primarily the United States. What we are watching right now is a renegotiation, not a revolution. A slow, contested, violent renegotiation of who sets the terms. $100 trillion doesn't move quietly unless the people moving it want it to move quietly. The least you can do, the very least you can do, is notice. I'm Justin Bantam. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and if the Sovereign Wealth Fund would like to sponsor this channel, my email is in the description. Ciao for now.